On the storm-beaten coast of Oregon, an old lighthouse still stands, silent, forgotten, a monument to men who never came home. Inside, Jack Miller, a former Marine haunted by the ghosts of war, seeks nothing but peace. But that night, peace came scratching at his door. A wounded German shepherd, eyes filled with pain and purpose. Jack didn't know it yet, but saving that dog would awaken a secret buried deep beneath these cliffs, and a truth his family was never meant to find. The storm had swallowed the Oregon coast whole, waves striking the cliffs like cannon fire beneath a sky split by white lightning. Inside the old Stormwatch lighthouse, Jack Miller sat near a flickering oil lamp, the walls trembling with every gust. At 36, Jack's frame was still strong, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, and marked by the quiet discipline of a man who had seen too much war. His short beard, streaked with silver, framed a face weathered by wind and regret. Ever since returning from Afghanistan, he had lived in solitude, seeking silence to drown the noise in his head. But that night, the storm was not the only thing knocking at his door. A faint scratching rose above the howling wind. At first, Jack dismissed it as debris scraping against the wood. Then came a low whimper, so soft it barely existed between thunderclaps. Instinct, the same that had saved him countless times, drew him to the heavy door. He unlatched it slightly, and a burst of icy rain blasted inside. There, half buried in snow and sand, lay a German shepherd, its fur matted with blood and seawater. This animal looked young but full-grown, its gray-black coat dulled by salt. One amber eye was swollen shut, the other glimmered with an intelligence that pierced through the storm. Jack lifted the dog into his arms, surprised by its weight and warmth, even in the cold. The animal didn't resist, only whimpered once, then fell limp. Inside, Jack laid it on an old wool blanket near the fire, his hands steady despite the tremor in his chest. He found a deep wound along its flank and another across the neck, too clean, too deliberate. As he cleaned and stitched, the old Marine inside him stirred. His mind whispered battle memories, men bleeding out in deserts, his own hands pressing against wounds he could not close. "Easy, boy," he murmured, voice rough, eyes soft with a sorrow that was not just for the dog. Hours passed before the storm began to fade. The fire burned low, casting long orange lines across the cabin's walls. Jack sat back, exhaustion pulling at him. The dog, he decided to call him Duke, breathed shallow but steady. Outside, the waves crashed with a distant rhythmic calm. For the first time in years, Jack felt something alive in the silence of the lighthouse, a quiet companionship he had forgotten existed. He leaned back in the old chair, eyes heavy, but his instincts refused to sleep. There was a weight in the air, something waiting beyond the storm. Just before dawn, Duke stirred. The sound woke Jack instantly. The dog stood, unsteady but alert, his tail stiff, ears raised toward the window facing the northern cliffs. Jack followed his gaze and froze. Beyond the fog, faint flashes of light flickered against the horizon. Not lightning, but something mechanical, deliberate. Duke growled softly, his fur rising. Jack felt it too, an unease that crawled up his spine. He walked to the window, his reflection merging with the dark sea beyond. The dog's eyes glowed in the dim firelight, fixed on that mysterious direction. Jack whispered, "What are you seeing out there, boy?" Duke didn't look away. The storm had passed, but something else was calling. Morning broke gray and heavy over the Oregon coast, the sea calm but uneasy after the storm's violence. The old lighthouse stood like a scar on the cliffs, its windows fogged, its keeper still restless from the night before. Jack Miller hadn't slept. He sat by the fire, his hand absently resting on the head of Duke, who now dozed beside him, his wounds cleaned and bandaged. The dog was recovering fast, his thick gray-black fur still damp, but his eyes alert, always tracking every sound outside. Jack sipped bitter coffee from a dented tin cup, staring through the window toward Storm Cove, where faint light still flickered over the horizon, too steady to be natural. The creak of tires on gravel broke his thoughts. Few ever came to storm watch. Jack rose instinctively, posture straightening, that old marine caution tightening his shoulders. Outside, a weather-worn jeep climbed the slope, the wind whipping its antenna. A woman stepped out, shielding her eyes against the morning glare. She was tall and slender, early 30s, with chestnut hair tied back loosely, and eyes sharp as sea glass. Her name was Emma Brooks, a reporter for the Harbor Sentinel. Her coat, too thin for the cold, flapped against her frame, and her boots were caked with road dust. There was curiosity in her gaze, but also a fatigue that spoke of long nights chasing truths others wished buried. Jack didn't like visitors, but something about her steady composure disarmed him. "I'm looking for Jack Miller," she said, her voice clear despite the wind. Jack nodded slowly. "You found him." Emma hesitated only a moment before pulling a manila folder from her satchel. "My editor said you used to serve in the Marines. You might want to see this." She handed him the folder, her gloved fingers trembling slightly. Inside were aged photographs, blurred black and white images of a naval vessel half submerged, its hull marked USS Horizon. Another page bore a typed manifest, Captain Robert Miller. Jack's breath caught, the coffee cup in his hand stilled midair. Emma continued quietly. "I'm investigating Coastline Holdings. They're salvaging wrecks along this stretch of coast, claiming environmental cleanup. But the Horizon wasn't just a wreck. It was your father's ship, wasn't it?" Jack's silence was answer enough. He looked out toward the sea again, memory pressing down like the storm's weight. "He went down in that explosion," he murmured. "They said it was an accident." Emma shook her head. "It wasn't. I found reports suggesting a controlled detonation done from the inside. And there's more." Her tone softened. "Your father filed a classified report 2 days before the ship vanished. It never reached the Navy." Jack's jaw clenched. The sound of waves filled the space between them. Duke suddenly stood, hackles raised, his gaze fixed on the cliffs again. A deep growl rumbled in his chest. Emma turned toward the window. "What's he seeing?" she asked. Jack moved closer, scanning the distant rocks. Through the mist, a faint orange glint pulsed like a dying heartbeat. "Signal light," Jack muttered, "or maybe a flare." He grabbed his coat from the chair. "If Coastline's down there, they shouldn't be." Emma followed him to the door, determination lighting her face. "Then let's find out." Duke barked once, sharp and commanding, as if confirming their pact. Jack gave a curt nod, the soldier's resolve returning to his eyes. The storm had taken the night, but the real darkness was waiting beyond the cliffs. The tide was falling when Jack, Emma, and Duke reached the jagged mouth of the cave below Storm Cove. The air reeked of salt, rust, and the faint metallic scent of decay that clung to forgotten wrecks. Duke moved first, his paws careful but confident, across the slick stones. His gray-black fur was streaked with mud and salt, but his nose stayed low, tracing a trail only he could sense. Jack followed close behind, flashlight cutting through the mist, the beam trembling slightly in his calloused hand. Emma came last, clutching her satchel against her chest, her breath forming pale clouds in the chill air. She hated confined spaces, an old fear from a childhood accident in a collapsed cellar, but she refused to turn back. The cave widened into a hollow dome, and there, half swallowed by sand and seawater, lay the corroded remains of the USS Horizon. Its hull, eaten by time, rose like the skeleton of some metal leviathan. Barnacles clung to its ribs. Tangles of kelp drifted like ghostly curtains in the current. Jack's throat tightened. His father's ship, his father's grave. He approached slowly, brushing his hand along the cold metal until his palm rested on the faint letters, still visible beneath the rust. Horizon. The touch pulled a flood of memory. His father's steady voice, the smell of engine oil, the day he waved goodbye and never came home. Duke whined softly, pressing his head against Jack's knee, grounding him in the present. Emma climbed aboard first, agile despite the slick deck. Her flashlight beam swept the shattered corridor and flickered on something pale, wedged between two beams. She gasped softly. A body, or what remained of one, a skeleton in the tattered remains of a Navy uniform, ribs half buried in sand. Around the bone's wrist still clung a corroded bracelet marked J. Halpern. Jack knelt beside it, removing a small object clutched in the skeletal hand. A brass plate, roughly etched. The words barely legible. "The beacon will shine again." His heart pounded. "That was my father's phrase," he whispered. "He said it before every mission." Emma watched him quietly, her face pale in the beam's glow. Maybe he wanted someone to find this. Deeper inside the wreck, Duke barked, tail stiff. Jack and Emma followed the sound into a cabin warped by time. In the corner stood an old military radio transceiver, its casing dented, wires snaking across the floor. To Jack's disbelief, a dim red light still pulsed on its console, and from the speaker came a weak but steady rhythm. 3 short beeps, 3 long, 3 short. "SOS," Emma breathed. Jack adjusted the dials, but the signal grew fainter, as though smothered by interference. Static hissed, then, faintly, a voice fragment. "Not accident. Coordinates. Hold the line." The transmission died. Silence filled the hull like water. Jack leaned back, stunned. "He was sending a distress call," he said quietly. "All this time, it's been looping." Emma frowned. Someone must have wanted it hidden. The company, maybe, if the wreck was carrying something it shouldn't. Jack's jaw clenched, his voice darkening. Or someone stopped it deliberately. He looked down at the brass plate again, the words glinting in the flashlight's trembling beam. He was trying to warn me. Or warn everyone. Outside, the tide turned, waves roaring back into the cave mouth. Duke barked twice, sharp and urgent. Jack looked at Emma. "We have to get this signal out before it's gone forever." She nodded once, fear and resolve mingling in her eyes. Together, they gathered the evidence, the faint pulse of the radio still echoing behind them, like a heartbeat from the past refusing to die. The sun was already sinking behind the cliffs when Jack, Emma, and Duke emerged from the cave, soaked and shivering. The ocean below burned gold under the dying light, but the air carried a strange stillness, the kind that came before danger. Jack tightened his grip on the weathered brass plate in his hand, his mind still echoing with the fading pulse of that radio signal. They had proof, now, But proof was worthless if they didn't make it out alive. Duke sniffed the air, his body tense, ears pricked forward. A low growl rumbled in his throat. Jack felt it too, a presence watching from the ridge above. The first shot hit the rock near Emma's feet, splintering stone and sending echoes across the cove. "Down!" Jack shouted, dragging her behind a drift of broken boulders. Duke barked fiercely, darting to the side. From the ridge above, a tall figure stepped into the fading light, rifle slung across his chest. Trent Wallace, head of Coastline's Private Security Division, looked every inch the predator. He was in his late 30s, broad-shouldered and clean-cut, his blonde hair slicked back from a hard, angular face. A scar crossed his jaw like a pale lightning strike. The tailored black tactical coat he wore marked him as corporate muscle, but his eyes, cold gray, familiar in a way that unsettled Jack, carried something more personal. "Nice to see you still have your father's stubborn streak," Trent called down, voice calm but sharp as broken glass. "He was just as hard to reason with." Jack rose halfway from cover, anger darkening his expression. "Who the hell are you?" Trent smirked. "Someone who knows what really happened to the horizon." He slung the rifle over his shoulder, descending the slope with practiced ease. "Your father wasn't a hero, Jack. He was covering up a transport, nuclear waste, illegal, untraceable. He was supposed to sink it, but he tried to expose it instead. The company couldn't let that happen. Neither could I." Jack froze. "You?" he said, the word a whisper. Trent stopped a few paces away, eyes hard. "Trent Miller. He was my father too." The name hit Jack like a blow. For a heartbeat, all he could hear was the wind and the sea. He saw flashes, old photos on his father's desk, a boy in a Navy uniform beside him, but he'd never known who it was. "You're lying," Jack said. He never told you because he was ashamed," Trent cut in, his voice rising. "He abandoned my mother when she was dying, all because of his precious duty. And when I grew up, I found out his heroism was a lie." Emma stepped between them, voice steady but urgent. "Trent, whatever happened, killing won't fix it." Trent's eyes flicked to her, indifferent. "You think I care about fixing it? I'm cleaning it up." He raised his rifle again. "That wreck, that radio, it all dies tonight." Before he could fire, Duke lunged from the side, teeth sinking into Trent's sleeve. The gun went off, echoing like thunder. Jack charged, tackling Trent onto the wet stones. The two men grappled, brothers bound by blood and betrayal, fists and fury crashing like waves. Trent slammed Jack's head against the rock, sneering, "You're fighting for a ghost!" Jack's voice came through gritted teeth. "No, for the truth." With a final surge, he knocked Trent's weapon away. It clattered into the surf below. Trent lay gasping, the tide creeping toward him. For a brief second, Jack saw not an enemy, but a broken reflection of himself, different paths carved by the same loss. "It didn't have to be this way," Jack said quietly. Trent's gray eyes softened for the first time, a flicker of guilt crossing his face. "You still don't understand," he murmured. "It's bigger than both of us." Then, before Jack could answer, Trent rolled toward the edge and vanished down the slope into the shadows below. The surf swallowed the sound. Duke barked once, chest heaving, while Emma stood frozen beside them, the sea wind howling around the cliffs. Jack looked down at his bleeding knuckles, whispering to himself, "Same blood, different war." Night fell fast, swallowing the cliffs in shades of iron and ash. The wind carried the distant hum of thunder, rolling low across the horizon. Jack stood on the rocks above the tide, the brass plate cold in his hand. The words, "The beacon will shine again," catching the faint moonlight. Beside him, Emma Brooks wrapped her coat tight, her auburn hair whipped by the wind, her face pale with exhaustion. Duke pressed close to her leg, his coat streaked with mud and blood, his amber eyes locked on Jack. The cave entrance behind them glowed faintly with the reflection of water lapping against the twisted wreck of the USS Horizon. Somewhere out there, beneath the waves, secrets waited to be buried or revealed. Jack turned to Emma, voice low but steady. "If that ship's reactor leaks, this whole coast will be poisoned. Coastline's cleanup was a lie. They were mining uranium from the wreck. My father knew it, and they silenced him." His gaze hardened, the calm resolve of a soldier resurfacing. "I can finish what he started." Emma's eyes widened, her breath catching. "You're not going down there alone." Jack gave a faint smile, one corner of his mouth lifting in quiet defiance. "I've been alone a long time, Emma. It's what I do best." She reached out, grabbing his arm. "Jack, please." For a moment, the mask of composure slipped. He looked at her, saw the fear, and the unspoken affection in her eyes, and nodded. "If I don't come back, make sure they know the truth." The storm returned in sudden fury as Jack descended into the flooded hull. Waves crashed through the broken corridors, echoing with metallic groans. The beam of his flashlight caught swirling debris, helmets, rusted tools, fragments of a life swallowed by time. The air was thick with the sting of salt and decay. He reached the control room, half collapsed under a steel beam. Through the cracked glass of the console, faint red lights still blinked from the reactor's emergency system. Jack pulled a corroded cable from his pack and connected it to the auxiliary terminal, sparks flaring in the darkness. He worked with mechanical precision, hands steady despite the freezing water rising to his chest. Duke's bark echoed faintly from above the cave, as if urging him to hurry. Jack flipped the final switch. The radar atop the wreck sputtered, then roared to life, sweeping a beam of white light across the stormy sea. For a brief second, the horizon glowed, an unbroken arc of radiance piercing the rain. "Come on, old man," Jack muttered, glancing upward. "Your beacon's lit again." But the system overloaded. The warning klaxon screamed, red lights flashing across the console. He saw the reactor temperature spike, uncontainable. He had only moments. Water surged around him, the current dragging at his legs. Jack inhaled sharply, whispered a silent prayer, and slammed the override lever down. The explosion began as a low, deep rumble that grew into a blinding roar of fire and light. On the cliffs above, Emma fell to her knees, shielding her face as the sea erupted. The water turned gold and red, the night split by a column of flame. The beam from the radar rose skyward, burning brighter than any stormlight, a lighthouse reborn in death. "Jack!" she screamed, voice breaking. Duke howled beside her, a mournful, shattering sound that carried across the wind. The waves crashed harder, scattering ash and sparks along the shore. Then came silence, only the hiss of rain meeting fire. Emma's tears mixed with sea water as she stared into the glowing horizon, whispering, "You kept your promise." Duke pressed against her side, trembling. In the distance, faint sirens echoed from approaching rescue boats, but she didn't move. The beacon had gone dark again. Dawn crept slowly through a curtain of fog that wrapped the Oregon coast like a shroud. For 3 days the sea had roared without pause, carrying away every trace of the explosion that had turned the night to fire. The villagers of Harbor Point spoke of a light that had split the storm, an impossible beam blazing across the waves from a place long dead, the old Stormwatch Lighthouse. On this third morning, as mist thinned and gulls cried over the gray surf, that light burned again, steady and golden. Inside the lantern room, its cracked glass glowing like an ember, stood Jack Miller, barefoot and bandaged, his face pale but alive. He remembered nothing of the hours after the blast, only the crush of water and the cold darkness pulling him under. When he woke, he was lying on the deck of a fishing boat, coughing salt and blood. The boat belonged to Elias Harper, a fisherman in his 50s, with skin tanned to bronze and a beard like sea foam. Elias was broad-shouldered and stoic, a man whose silence spoke more than words. His left hand was missing 2 fingers, lost years earlier in a trawling accident, yet he handled his vessel with calm precision. "You're lucky," he'd said in his gravelly voice, offering Jack a flask of water. "The sea doesn't often give back what it takes." Elias had pulled him from the wreckage half a mile offshore, guided by the strange glow still rising from the horizon. Now, inside the lighthouse, Jack watched that same repaired light flicker to life. Powered by a small generator Elias had salvaged and carried up the cliff himself. The warmth spread through the cold stone chamber, and for the first time since the war, Jack felt something like peace. On the table beside him sat the soaked military radio unit he had rescued from the horizon. Its casing was dented and burned, but the data crystal inside remained intact. Within it lay the last report of Captain Robert Miller, a message confirming that Coastline Holdings had ordered the illegal disposal of radioactive material and silenced anyone who resisted. Jack stared at the console, his father's voice faint in his mind. "The beacon will shine again." The sound of boots on the stairs broke his thoughts. Emma appeared in the doorway, her coat damp from the mist, eyes red from sleepless nights. She had been searching the shoreline every morning since the explosion, refusing to believe he was gone. When she saw him standing there, the air left her lungs. "You're alive," she whispered. Jack smiled weakly. "Took the long way home." She crossed the room in 2 steps, wrapping her arms around him before words could fail them both. Duke, tail wagging furiously, barked once and pressed his head against Jack's leg. His fur was matted with sand, but his eyes gleamed with the same loyalty that had carried them through every storm. That afternoon, Sheriff Brody arrived at the lighthouse, his patrol SUV crunching across the gravel path. Brody was a large man in his late 50s, with a stern jaw softened by kindness and a sheriff's badge dulled by years of salt air. He had been on duty the night the explosion was reported. Now he carried news. Trent Miller had been found on the northern cliffs, injured and delirious, muttering apologies before surrendering himself. He admitted to working for Coastline under false promises, told the company wanted only to clean the wreck, not bury its crimes. His statement, combined with Jack's data crystal, would expose everything. As dusk fell, Jack climbed to the lantern room once more. The repaired beacon swept across the darkening sea, its glow steady and true. Emma stood beside him, Duke lying at their feet. "You kept your promise," she said softly. Jack looked out toward the endless gray water, his father's words echoing in his mind. "No," he murmured, resting a hand on the glass. "He did." Outside, the fog thinned just enough for the horizon to gleam. a faint shimmer of light that seemed to answer back. Spring came late that year to the Oregon coast. The fog still clung to the cliffs each morning, and the gulls wheeled over the gray surf, as if guarding secrets the sea refused to give up. In the rebuilt Storm Watch lighthouse, sunlight poured through newly polished glass panes, scattering gold across the stone floor. The once desolate beacon had transformed. Its salt-worn walls now held life and purpose again. On the brass plaque near the entrance, newly engraved words glinted under the rising sun. The Beacon Foundation for healing, honor, and hope. It had been 6 months since the coastline scandal broke. Emma Brooks' investigative series, The Depths of Deceit, had exploded across national news. Her reporting had exposed the company's decades-long cover-up, the illegal dumping, and the manipulation that led to Captain Robert Miller's death. Coastline's CEO, Victor Hale, a gaunt man in his 60s with swept-back silver hair, and the smug calm of a lifelong manipulator, was arrested after the data from Jack's recovered radio proved his involvement. Hale had been a master of illusion, always appearing generous in public, donating to charities, shaking hands with governors, while hiding behind forged reports. When confronted during his arraignment, he had only said, "Some truths belong at the bottom of the sea." His empire fell within weeks. Jack watched the aftermath unfold from the cliffs, choosing silence over spotlight. The media wanted interviews, but he declined them all. Instead, with state support and local volunteers, he turned Stormwatch into a refuge, a place for veterans struggling with the same invisible wounds he carried. Every room was rebuilt by hand. Dormitories for soldiers returning from war, therapy spaces facing the ocean, and an outdoor training field for rescue dogs. Duke, now fully healed, but bearing a long scar across his right shoulder, led the training sessions proudly. The German Shepherd had grown calmer but wiser, a living symbol of endurance. Children from the nearby fishing town often visited to feed him treats, giggling when he saluted on command. Emma became the Foundation's communications director, though her heart was still that of a journalist. Her auburn hair had grown longer, tied back loosely, as she worked late editing veteran stories for the Foundation's website. Jack often found her at the window of the lantern room, camera in hand, capturing the light that once marked his salvation. Between them, words were few but deep. What began as shared loss had turned into quiet companionship. She had a gift for reminding him to live in the present, even when the ghosts whispered. "You don't have to keep fighting, Jack," she once told him, her hand resting on his arm. "You already won." That evening, as the sun sank low, Sheriff Brody visited for the dedication ceremony. He was dressed in his crisp uniform, his grizzled face soft under the golden light. Standing beside him was Maya Torres, a young veteran counselor in her late 20s with dark curly hair and a warm, calm presence. She had lost her brother overseas and dedicated her life to helping others heal. "We've got 3 new arrivals tomorrow," she told Jack, handing him a clipboard. "They heard what you built here. Said it gave them hope." Jack nodded, his weathered face breaking into a rare, quiet smile. As the crowd dispersed, leaving only the hum of the waves and the rustle of wind through the pines, Jack climbed the spiral staircase to the top of the lighthouse. Emma and Duke followed close behind. He paused at the lantern, fingers brushing the old switch. Below them, the Foundation glowed in the twilight, new lives beginning under the watch of the old tower. Jack exhaled slowly, then pressed the switch. The great lamp flared to life, casting a beam of warm gold across the endless water. The light reached far beyond the horizon, just as his father's had once done. Emma leaned close, whispering, "It's beautiful." Jack looked out over the sea, eyes reflecting the glow. "It's not just light," he said softly. "It's home." Sometimes God's light doesn't appear in grand miracles. It shines quietly through broken people who refuse to give up. Jack, Emma, and Duke remind us that even from loss, faith can rebuild what darkness destroyed. The storm may take what we love, but it can never take the purpose God places in our hearts. Each act of kindness, every choice to forgive, every light we share with another, is proof that His grace still moves through this world. So if this story touched you, share it with someone who needs hope tonight. Leave a comment below, subscribe to our channel, and join our journey of faith and healing. May God bless every viewer watching this, and may His light guide you through your own storms, until your beacon shines again.